G'day guys, this is a video on NAD and looking at some of the supplementations that are out there, the different options that people can take, both supplemental and food sources to support NAD. So let's just look at a recent study. While this hasn't been peer reviewed, it does involve our well-known author David Sinclair and a number of other people that work in the longevity sort of field, both throughout the world. So the main parties are as follow. I'll just go through them. Let me just share the actual screen. Okay, so it's called nicotinamide mononucleotide, which is NMN. The amination and indirect regulation of the NAD metabolome. So they're looking at basically how this supplement NMN is operating. It seems to be operating similar to NR as well. So, and they're actually, because there's been some work there as well in that area. The University of New South Wales in Sydney is the chief one. This is the one that David Sinclair, originally worked at. Obviously now he's at Boston, so the Harvard Medical School is also involved in this as a party to this. There's a, Hong Kong company here that's actually involved. There's a university in Hong Kong as well that's involved. There's another sort of a fertility type company in Australia, in Melbourne, that's also involved. University of Sydney, providing some of the mathematics and statistical support. So let's get on with it. Okay, this is just a general abstract. Treatment with nicotinamide mononucleotide NMN, that I'll be using that terminology, is a prominent strategy to address age-related decline in nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, which is NAD+. Okay, levels for maintaining aspects of later life health. So from now on, I'll be using NAD to indicate this and NMN to indicate this. Okay, so, and also for nicotinic acid, which is niacin, I'll be using the word niacin just so we can keep things clean and what I'm actually referring to. It is assumed that exogenous NMN is directly incorporated into the NAD metabolome in mammals via the canonical recycling pathway. Now, I'll just show you this. This image comes out of this study. So this is a review back in 2015, NAD in aging, metabolism and neurodegeneration. And that's where I got this figure. So just in case people want to know where I actually got it from. So just because it's a really good, it's a general review, but it also has really good diagrams, which just makes it bloody easy to basically show these sort of stuff. And it does, show this sort of stuff. Anyway, let's go. So this is basically where they thought that they went through this. So the diet, nicotinamide riboside, NR, I'll be using the word NR from now on, basically converts to NMN, and then it goes through this enzymatic pathway and into this big, large molecule, which we call NAD+. Okay, so, and then once it's actually gone through this process, NAD is consumed by sirtuins, PARPs, CD38, and which is a protective mechanism, remember I said. which goes up with age, and CD157. And then it drops. This diagram is missing one thing. They did believe there is an enzyme called CD73. Well, they still sort of believe that actually helps. That actually they believe brought these two into the actual, from the extracellular into the intracellular sort of thing in that regard. But we will see that it's a bit more different than the canonical, the original sort of claim. So there may be, they still haven't tested thoroughly the CD73 pathway. There may be some metabolites that are basically using that, and that's where we got tricked. We misunderstood that pathway. So that's for another day, but just to be for completeness. So you can either get it this way and then recycle it through. The liver will actually convert it to nicotinamide, which is basically, the reduced form of, vitamin B3. Okay, so that's the thing. You can actually either get it from the diet, or you can basically then get it from a cheap supplement that comes in this format. It goes through this salvage pathway and basically goes through again through the NAD to support. Very inefficient, and it's not a pathway, and it does actually get, if CD38 goes up, it does get inhibited over time, so it becomes even less efficient and less efficient over time. So that's the other thing. Obviously, as I've mentioned before, CD38 is produced by senescent cells. It's a protective mechanism, and so we don't want to suppress it. We want to basically sort of deal with the senescence, but that's for another video, to cover senescence and how to deal with senescence. So we'll just, for completeness, I mention these things. Then there is also the de novo biosynthesis pathway, so internal biosynthesis pathway through tryptophan. So tryptophan goes through a number of enzymatic pathways. Quinolinic acid will actually convert it to this nicotinic acid mononucleotide, NAMN, and then it will go through this pathway of nicotinic acid adenine dinucleotide, NAAD, and then through NADS, it will basically, another enzymatic step will go here. Anyway, so so there are a number of pathways. So the other pathway is, again, diet, nicotinic acid, which is what is very high in animal foods. It's the B vitamin in animal foods, but predominant, and it will go through this pathway. So it will go through NAMN, then NATI, T1/3. So we'll go through that enzyme, and then it will go through this enzyme to be converted to NAD+. So it's a couple of enzymatic enzymatic steps, and this has its own enzymatic steps. Now, tryptophan, just to cover that, is, well, so these are the tryptophan foods. So just for completeness, these sort of RDIs that they think we should be getting for somebody around that. See, that's the sort of weight. So when you're actually looking at weights, you should always consider all micronutrients and macro and the key amino acids and fatty acids in terms of the weight of the organism. So that's why you've got to be very careful. If you're below that, you're probably fine. If you're above that, you may need more. So it's just always to keep that in mind. People don't take this into consideration. You know, when you're looking at animal foods, they're very high in tryptophan. So, you know, I mean, that's basically nearly 3.53 ounces. Now, I don't know many carnivores that only consume that amount. You can actually see, you know, you're more than likely to consume about 4 times that. So you're looking at nearly getting close to, you know, way over 500% in one meal. You know, so, you know, we get plenty, let's put it that way, to support a lot of different pathways, plus for more to actually then fall through this pathway. So you can get spillage when you've got quite a bit coming into the body. So it's a good thing to be on a carnivore diet. I think that's where we see the benefit in terms of basically getting, you know, our skin becomes younger, cleaner, our body, even though people are not taking, you know, niacin and not doing all these other things, they seem to basically be getting the benefits of this increase in energy that's NAD, you know. So it's probably coming from the tryptophan pathway. So a lot of that. So basically, when we're looking at all these animal foods, they're quite high in that regard. Another advantage of the carnivore diet, as you can see, you know, when it comes to, these are all based on this sort of 6 ounces of steak, 6 ounces of lean pork chops. So pretty much all the meats are pretty much the same. Obviously, there's tofu, which is quite competitive, but we'll come back to that. Salmon and most fish are not too far behind at the same quantities. A glass of milk can give you 75%. And I know I don't stop at 1 glass of milk sometimes. 4 eggs can give you 100%. So, you know, pretty good as a bonus on that. So the 500 on a big steak, 4 eggs, you're up to 600%, plenty. When we look at things like oats, pretty low. There's very few plants that have. So you've got basically seeds, and we know seeds are not very good bioavailable when it comes to these sort of proteins. In many cases, they, you know, they just go right through you. You know, that's what they're designed. They're not very well absorbed in that regard, seeds through the intestinal tract. They're much harder. They've got a lot of anti-nutrients, and they're not the best sort of thing. When it comes to, you know, soybeans and tofu and stuff like that, the numbers look fairly good. Oats, you know, you got to, just to get your RDI, you literally have to have 3 cups, which is quite a bit. Most people are going to have 1, maybe 1.5 cups. Most vegans or vegetarians or whatever, they're not going to have that much. Vegetarians probably do much better because they do get the milk in as well. So let's also look at the important factor, which is the, in terms of amino acid activation, you know, what gets taken in, you know, what actually the uptake of the protein you're going. So when we're looking at plants, they're much reduced. So we have to look in regards to eggs, because eggs have the highest level of, you know, actual protein, amino acid accumulation, actually uptake. So more of the actual amino acids in egg, 47%, will be taken up by the body for those purposes of building blocks, where, you know, in most other, like even meats, it's 32%. And when you're looking at plants, it's down to 17%. So when we're looking at even, so that's not a good source. So when we're looking at basically these sort of things, so let's say a cup of tofu, so 17 divided by 47. So it's about nearly just slightly over a third times 212. So we're looking at about, you know, whole cup, 77%. That's all you're going to get. So you have to have at least 2 cups, and then it's going to be used through a number of pathways. You're not going to get a large surplus in that regard from such a food. You know? And when we're looking at, you know, something less processed and less concentrated, which is a real food, which traditionally people wouldn't be consuming this sort of processed tofu, but actually be consuming something which is more like plant food. And this is the best in terms of the plant foods. When we're looking at this, we're looking at 17 divided by 47 times 149. So a cup will only give you about 54%. So you'd have to have 2 cups. You know, it's quite a lot of fiber, quite difficult to put down, but you can do it, but that's just to get the bare minimum. So 3 cups would get you a little surplus. So in terms of that, and when we look at meat, so, and that's 6 ounces. So when we look at basically that sort of level, we're looking at 32% divided by 47 times, we'll go for the beef, gives you 7. So you're getting about 154.5%. And most people will have way more than that. So that's for that amount. I'll just copy that. So when we're looking at about, which is nearly 18, let's just go for 16. 16 times 28.33333. So that'll give us about 453, which is a big steak, which is something that I usually consume about that much in terms of steak per day, and most carnivores would, which is, you know, about slightly less than a pound. Okay, so that's what we're talking about now. And divide that by 6 and times by that value, that's about 400%. So one big steak will give us 400%, you know, compared to many, you know, and that's, you know, I'm being very conservative in that regard, what gets uptaken and all that. So as you can see with animal products, you're going to have, when it comes to this pathway, you're going to have plenty of spillage through here. Plenty. Through this enzyme, you'll actually convert it to NAMN. So you'll get plenty of nicotinic acid mononucleotide to run through and basically create more energy. That is why carnivores do enjoy more energy, you know, in that regard. And we get plenty of niacin as well. So, you know, tuna, lean pork, beef, you know. So you can see niacin levels. Tuna's very high in niacin, but all the other meats are pretty high. When you look at plants, it's very, very low. The highest is basically when you're looking at mushrooms, and that's not, I don't consider that a plant. I consider that a fungus. So you literally have to have three basically cups of rice just to get your daily requirement. Now, I don't know many vegans out there that are having that amount. It's just not happening in that regard. And so, you know, if you're looking at 16, which is just a standard steak, divided by 6 times 100. You're getting from a steak, from chicken, you're getting 266%. And from a steak, so 16 divided by 6 times 60, you're getting 160%. You're getting way above the the RDI. So you're getting a surplus in that regard. So even pork obviously is much better. So when it comes to pork, 16 divided by 6 times 85, getting about 200+%. So double what we require to support that other pathway. And we haven't even touched, in that regard, divide that by 85 times 13.6. So it's about 36%. 36 milligrams. And that's why I say you probably only, to get up to 100, which I probably have 125, the supplemental now and then, which is every 2 days. So that would be 62 and a half. I might do 2 and a half every 2 days. So that's giving me nearly 100 just from something like pork and all that. If I average it out, it usually comes out at around about 100, which I've told you guys before. It's an approximate in terms of milligrams per day. So I get plenty in that regard. So that's a good level of supplemental from one supplement every 2 days, plus the animal foods. Sometimes if I've, like pigged out on a number of animal foods, then I may leave it every 3 days, because I'm getting plenty, so I don't really have to worry. So I get plenty to support that pathway as well. So, which is that pathway? Okay, Prezi handler pathway. So that covers that sort of side. Now, so we've got the nutrient side covered. So we carnivores get quite a bit from tryptophan spillage. We're having quite a bit, so we can actually utilize it for sending it through that other enzymatic pathway to support the NAD. And then we get plenty of niacin compared to other people in the diet to support the other pathway. So 2 of the pathways are covered comprehensively well in that regard. And even the salvage pathway is much better because we've got enhanced NAD. When you've got enhanced NAD, the general performance of the body is much better at repairing and all that. So we will not build up in CD38 at the same rate as other people, which is important as well. So our sort of healthier lifestyle and healthier diet will basically also have a positive effect. A cleaner and healthier liver will have a positive effect on that pathway as well. So you have to think in this holistic way, not in sort of a reductionist, just narrowly looking at each pathway, but also the synergistic effect of all these pathways. So now let's get back to this study, which basically they are talking. Here we show that NMN, which is one of the key expensive supplements to support NAD. So you guys know it's quite expensive. And I think it's a waste of fucking money. And so is NR. Anyway, can undergo direct deamination and incorporation via the de novo pathway, which is part mediated by the gut microbiome. It's very much mediated, as the study will show. Surprisingly, isotope labeling studies reveal exogenous NMN treatment potentially increases the endogenous production of unlabeled NAD metabolites, suggesting that exogenous NMN impacts the NAD metabolism through indirect means rather than through its direct incorporation. Very important. So what this research has shown is that it's not going through this pathway. That is not the pathway that it's going through. So this was the original way we thought this all happened. Okay, so this included strikingly increase in endogenous production of metabolites, nicotinic acid riboside and nicotinamide riboside, which was amplified in antibiotic-treated animals, suggesting the production of endogenous NAR through altered metabolic flux, enzyme kinetics, and or as yet undefined pathways that interact with the gut microbiome. So what they've actually found is it's actually the gut microbiome that is actually the player. So these supplements don't go directly in. That's why they're talking about these indirect pathways. So that's what they actually, so what they did was they treated these mice with a broad spectrum antibiotic and wiped out the gut microbiome to see what happens. So anyway, let's move on. So I'm not going to go about the sirtuins and all that sort of stuff and the DNA repair. That's anybody who wants to read that, they can read it in the thing. So we have targeted metabolites to trace the in vitro and in vivo metabolism of strategically designed NMN isotopologs to answer these questions. So they want to find out how the fuck it's all happening. So, which is part of, so I'll go down, which shows the NMN can be incorporated following a deamination and metabolism by the de novo route, which is a traditional one, which they thought, which is part mediated by the microbiome. We further show that ablation of microbiome by antibiotic treatment increases the uptake and conversion of orally derived NMN into NAD metabolome, and that isotope labeled in NMN overwhelmingly present in the intestinal tissue in the form of NAR and NR, contrary to the assumption that in exogenous NMN treatment raises NAD plus levels solely through its direct incorporation into the NAD metabolome. We show that treatment with isotope labeled NMN increases the levels of endogenous unlabeled NAD metabolites. Overall, our results provide unique insights into the assimilation of orally derived exogenous NMN to the gastrointestinal tissue and raise questions about how exogenous precursors alter the NAD metabolome. So basically, they've actually, labeled these so they can actually detect them, and they've actually found that I'll go shortly into that. Okay, so according to the canonical model of mammalian NAD homeostasis, the metabolism of NMN and intermediate in the recycling pathway. So this is the salvage pathway. This is that recycling pathway. So that's what the original textbooks wrote about. Does not interact with the de novo pathway, which utilizes deaminase intermediates. Unlike mammals, bacteria present in the gut microbiome do encode deaminase enzymes such as PNCC, which deaminate NMN into nicotinic acid mononucleotide. Okay, so what they found is for the metabolism by the de novo pathway. So what they found is this NAMN which is basically this, which when you actually take in niacin, nicotinic acid, you get the flush, and then this converts it into this, NAMN. So basically, that's what's actually being converted by the bacteria. Not going through here, it's actually going through this pathway, but actually somewhere in this area, not here, obviously, because it has nothing to do with, but it's being altered by the gut bacteria. That's what they're finding. So as you can see, NR and NMN are both being converted into this and then going through this pathway. So basically, you can either buy expensive supplements, or you can basically increase it in your diet or supplement with a bit of niacin. It's up to you. But at the end of the day, all this stuff, NMN, NR, expensive supplements, plus the cheap supplement of niacin, all go through this pathway eventually. They all meet here and then flow through to NAD. So you can take the expensive option, or you can take the cheaper option. That's up to you, which way you want to go. I know which way I want to go. To test whether the gut microbiome alters this, they orally administered and used mice that were exposed to a course of antibiotics to ablate the gut microbiome. So these received, this amount per kilogram, 500 milligrams per kilogram. Now, the other thing is they do say further down that through the bacteria, only 25% end up here. 75% end up going through the liver and getting metabolized back into nicotinamide, NAM, and depending on your CD38 and how old you are and how well this salvage pathway works, how much gets back, anyone's guess. It will be dependent on differences between people in that regard. And I don't like to play roulette. So anyway, now we'll go further down here. So don't think we'll bother with that. And here they just talk about the isotopic tracing, how they actually were able to trace the mechanistic pathways that it actually took. Anybody can actually check this out. That's not the purpose of this video. So anybody can go through and actually look at all these sort of pathways. And this is where's the antibiotic thing? 4 hours. Yep. Down here, which is basically suggested about 25% of oral administered undergoes deamination prior to the intake incorporation into NAD plus. So basically 25%, that's it, guys. That's all you're going to get from the supplement. That's an expensive option to take these sort of supplements, because that's all that's actually getting converted. The rest of it, will go through the liver, get converted to nicotinamide, and basically, depending on the salvage pathway, how much of that gets recovered is going to be very little. So it can vary between people. If you're young, yeah, plenty. If you're old, not as much. So I would not rely on these expensive supplements in that regard. So what we've concluded is and So an important caveat is the interpretation of that limited available osteoblabeled material meant that this study used a single time point rather than time course, which also encompasses very early time points, possibly missing the minute over kinetics of direct NMN transport that were previously reported. Maybe not. The other thing is important that even if you take this sort of supplement, it doesn't affect your gut microbiome diversity. So nothing to worry there. But I think the take-home message here is really that, you know, at the end, everything's going through this pathway. It's now the NAD doesn't actually, there's a lot of unlabeled, as they call it, that comes through. It seems that it actually magnifies the effect of this pathway, but doesn't directly contribute, but indirectly. Now, they don't know what sort of metabolites may be involved to enhancing this. So it's not going directly this way. It's having an effect here and maybe affecting some of the metabolites and all that. So, you know, that's where we come back to that. Remember that enzyme that I spoke about earlier, that CD73? Maybe that is playing some sort of role as well. We don't know because there's no research on it. I'm just speculating. So keep that in mind, that is a sheer mindless speculation on my part. Could be completely wrong. At the end of the day, whether you're taking in niacin, nicotinamide mononucleotide, nicotinamide riboside, they all end up being converted, these two, into nicotinic acid mononucleotide, whether it's from bacteria in the gut and, you know, being converted to this substance, or coming directly through the diet, and like niacin, which basically has an affinity to this enzyme, and basically that enzyme will convert niacin directly into this. So no bacteria required for that process. That's just an enzymatic pathway that's built into the body. So niacin is the natural source coming from food that basically has the right enzymatic pathway, and tryptophan is the other one. So if you're eating plenty of animal foods, you will have a spillage. You won't put as much into the TCA cycle, and basically, or the citric cycle, blah, blah. You'll basically have more spillage through this pathway, and the other stuff coming through this pathway will support this. So food can give you quite a bit of NAD support. And I suspect this is the advantage of a carnivore diet. The reason why we feel more strong, energized, and, you know, have the capacity, like, you know, Sean Baker and many others have that capacity, is because of this. Now, if we've got underlying conditions like a leaky gut, some of the malabsorption issues and stuff like that, we can't blame the carnivore diet for what other diets caused in the past. We need to resolve those. Some people will take longer. The carnivore diet doesn't do miracles. That's where you need a protocol, supplementation, some strategies to resolve those underlying issues. You know, if you've got a gallbladder issue, you need to mobilize the sludge out, which means taurine. So you may have to take slightly higher doses to clean it out. If the gut microbiome is a mess, you need to take B vitamins for 3 months and support those vitamins, because they require all the beneficial bacteria. They require vitamin D as well. So if you're substandard vitamin D, you cannot support a strong microbiome either. So there's a lot of things, you know, we're not outdoors. We avoid outdoors. We don't, you know, we avoid the sun, all these sort of things. We're not in circadian rhythms. There's a lot of things that we do wrong. So we can't turn, the carnivore diet isn't a panacea. I see the carnivore as a lifestyle, carnivore lifestyle, which incorporates some of those traditions that our paleo ancestors would have done. They would have been in circadian rhythms. They would have not been poisoning themselves. They would have had a good gut microbiome. They would have had all these sort of advantages from the lifestyle and the diet, and they wouldn't be basically wondering, oh, are my electrolytes right? Is this right? Is my gut permeability right? Why am I getting a histamine response? Why am I getting this? They would have had none of these questions because histamine would have stayed in the gut. If you've got no leaky gut, you're not going to get any histamine going into the bloodstream and heading for the brain. Histamine is not the problem. It's a wrecked gastrointestinal system. You need to understand that. All these people that are out there going, oh, you need this, you need that, and you need that. It's just a loaded bullshit. It's reductionist nonsense. They're sticking to reductionist nonsense. A couple of decades back when people were eating slightly more animal foods and less kibble, they didn't have these issues, let alone if you go even further back when people were eating proper animal-based diets. They didn't have any of these issues. Just because the old diets wrecked your system, you can't sit around actually saying, oh, the carnivore diet doesn't work for me. Now, if you've got a wrecked gut microbiome and you eat certain ketotic foods like some plants and all that, they can support a slightly better gut microbiome in a sense as a short-term solution. But they do cause other problems as well. Fix the gut is the important thing, and that can be fixed with vitamin D and B vitamins. And then they will come from the food and the lifestyle that will maintain those things. I'm going to do a video shortly, which is going to go into some of this sort of stuff because I'm sick and tired of the histamine myth and a lot of the other myths that are out there that are constantly plaguing our community, and people are making a lot of, noise when it's not justified. So I've got more scalps to basically, to take in that regard. But this focuses on the, NAD and whether we need all that bullshit supplementation, which we don't. We get plenty to support NAD through our diet. Now, if we want to enhance that, we can take something like niacin or a low dose niacin. Never high dose, that's contraindicated. It's not something that you want to do, but a low dose niacin is fine, if you want to enhance your own diet. But ultimately, if you eat good quantities of good quality animal foods, you will support both those pathways. The pathway that comes through the niacin pathway or the tryptophan pathway. Our diet is superior for those reasons. That's why we're more energized than other people, for those reasons. The thing is, we need to get the message out, and we need to stop people basically, peddling bullshit against the carnivore diet and blaming the carnivore diet for basically, one, not understanding the full lifestyle of the carnivore lifestyle and not understanding some of the factors that may be plaguing certain people, the unresolved things that they haven't corrected. Carnivore diet is superior at correcting these things, but you do need to help it along as well. And you need to identify what they are. And then you can get better results, and you're not going to have these issues. If you seal the gut, vitamin D is required to seal the gut, okay? And the animal foods that you take will actually increase the sort of stuff that protects and degrades, histamine. You still need some histamine. It's important. It has important effects even on DNA and a number of other things. So it is wrong to demonize histamine. The problem is leaky gut. LPS, around the pericellular matrix of all bacteria. They've got all those little hairline structures, which I've actually shown. That is there for a purpose, to maintain that negative charge and all that. They need that to actually move around. Just because they basically end up either dying and releasing a lot of that as endotoxin, or basically shedding it, and that then gets as lipopolysaccharides, as these little molecules into the bloodstream, it's because of the leaky gut. It has nothing to do, absolutely nothing to do with the bacteria in the gut or with the histamine in the gut from histamine foods? Absolutely nothing. You fix the gut, none of that gets through. If it doesn't get through, you don't have a problem. People used to consume shitloads of fermented foods in the past. They did not have, mass cell activation in their brains, histamine effects or whatever, because they didn't have a leaky gut. Our modern lifestyle and diet has created a leaky gut. We need to fix that and not basically deal with the, in a reductionist way, with the effects. We're dealing with the symptoms, not with the cause. That's our problem. And a lot of carnivores and keto people and all that, especially the naturopaths who have got income to derive from keeping you on that loop, on that merry-go-round, is why we have this sort of, I wouldn't say misinformation, but why we have this sort of thinking. It's a non-holistic thinking, and it's a reductionist thinking, and it basically just keeps people on this sick merry-go-round. We don't need it in our community. We need to basically sort it out. And that's my aim, to basically expose the bullshit and sort it out once and for fucking all. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Take care, and I will see you soon on some other issue of BS that needs to be sorted. See yous.